Happy New Year, everyone, and welcome to Bonnie Carolee Makes Cards. I have a set of 4 cards, same design, 4 colorways, featuring some gorgeous dies by Simon Says Stamp, layered birdie, and fine petal background plate. My stash of birthday cards is completely depleted, and so it's time to start building it up again. I prepared 4 panels of Bristol Smooth cardstock with Distress Oxide inks. The fine petal background plate is A2 size, 4 1/4 inches by 5 1/2 inches, so I made my panels just a little bit larger than that. This first panel is being inked with Villainous Potion, which I think I often call Villainous Purple. I'm not sure why. Well, I do know why, it's obvious. Shaded Lilac and Dusty Concord. As I blend with these inks, I do use a piece of scrap paper to protect my panel. Distress inks stay wet for a while, and I don't want to have to deal with fingerprints. The combination for this panel is Candied Apple, Crackling Campfire, and Ripe Persimmon. There wasn't that much difference between Campfire and Persimmon, so I used a little bit of picket fence over the Persimmon. For this panel, the dark tone was Faded Jeans, which wasn't quite dark enough, and I ended up switching over to Chipped Sapphire, followed by Mermaid Lagoon and Cracked Pistachio. For my final panel, I'm using Festive Berries, Picked Raspberry, and Worn Lipstick. So I have to be honest, this was the panel that was not planned. You'll notice that as I proceed, I'll be working with just this panel because for the other ones, I forgot to turn my video on. I get so upset with myself when I do this, but I kept consoling myself that I do need birthday cards, so I just pressed on and made a 4th one. To achieve a blend, I extend one color into the next color. As soon as I cross over into the next tone, I lighten my pressure. The panels were set aside to dry, so I started to work on the birds. They are being inked with hickory smoke and a little bit of black soot. On the top of the head, the tip of the tail, and the breast, I use a combination of the medium and light tone that was used on the background for each of the birds. For all these little pieces, I find it easier to work with ink daubers. The birds are easy to assemble. I pop the feet on first. Next, I adhere the die cut that details the upper portion of the bird. There is a score line which I will run the glue along, and that will position the wing where it needs to be. The smaller die cut, which gives more dimension to the wing, is adhered. After a dot of glue, the jewel picker helps me position that little tiny beak. The eye for the bird is die cut, but mine stayed intact, otherwise I would have popped it back in. I'm using a Copic liner just to draw in some definition below that eye, and then I'm going to be topping it off with black Nuvo drops. If that little die cut for that eye was not in place, the Nuvo drops would dimple. I add some dot detail to the throat and the breast using a white gel pen. A thin flattened line of Nuvo Glitter Drops White Blizzard follows the edges of the wing and also the tip of the tail. Okay, now to die cut the panels. This die is very detailed, and I rolled it back and forth probably 3 or 4 times. There were still a couple of areas that did not completely die cut, so I placed the die at a slight angle and then ran it through one more time. And I did that times 4. To remove the panel from the die, I thought it best to work from the bottom to the top. Because those flowers are die cut, I would be afraid that they might rip. I wanted to add some detailing to the edge of each of the flower die cuts. I used a dauber and applied VERSAMARK ink. Because this ink is slow drying, I was able to do a couple of rows at a time. I find that when I do this, I don't have to apply a lot of pressure, it's just a light rub. After the gold embossing powder is applied, I use a soft paintbrush just to remove any powder where I don't want it. After the embossing is melted, I continue and just work my way up the panel 2 rows at a time. Next, this panel is going to be adhered to a matte gold one that is exactly the same size, 4 1/4 inches by 5 1/2 inches. I run the glue along the top and the bottom of the panel and then follow along in between all of those flower die cuts. This ink blended panel is positioned on top of the gold one, and then I place my hand on top and give it a little bit of a rub so that I get good adhesion between the two. Just in case any of the glue has seeped, I don't want those flowers to be glued down, so I use a craft pick and quickly pick them all up. I want these flowers to stay dimensional, so I'm using small foam squares and I'm going to tuck them in right at the base of each of the flowers. The panels are then adhered to an A2 size top folding card base made from Neenah Classic Crest 110-pound cardstock. I wonder if you've been thinking about that ring that's sitting on my work surface. I'm actually working on my glass craft mat and it is reflecting my work light. Sorry about that. For the sentiment, I've chosen Simon's Happy Birthday. It has been used to die cut matte gold cardstock. It is perfectly sized to sit along the bottom of those flowers across the row. To adhere Simon's Layered Birdie to these dimensional backgrounds, I'm going to put some foam tape at the back of the head of each one. A little bit of glue is dotted onto the claws. The claws will sit on the top of one flower petal. The head will sit at the base of another. And that completes this set of birthday cards featuring Simon Says Stamp's Layered Birdie on a dimensional background using fine petal background plate. If you are interested in any of the products that were used in these cards, you can find the links in the description of my YouTube channel or on my blog at bonniecarolee.com. As always, I appreciate your visit.